I know people are on their lunch break, so we're just trying to get anxious to help you.
Okay, it's good. It just took a minute.
Great. So thanks for spending some time with us today. I'm going to try to share as much information as I can to get everyone kind of up to date on some of the new changes and just some general information about what's happening here if you haven't been a part of that dialogue as well. And then we'll have a chance for you to ask questions in a little bit. So just if you can, hold off on comments in the box until we're ready to ask questions so that Melissa, and who's helping you, Melissa?
Both Prana and Hannigan are on the call. I'm going to help you.
Okay, we're going to try to help with that, with questions when we get to that point. But I'll give you an overview first and try to, some of this will be new to people and some will be very new. So I'll try to say it as clear as I can. So the Indiana State Department of Health had kind of what I would probably call an emergency meeting of schools last week. They gave several options for schools to be a part of a webinar. They shared out a whole lot of new documents. You may be aware that there is a map coming. I haven't seen it show up yet. That's going to color code counties, and I'm not going to really talk about that today, but they've just got a lot of new initiatives to try to help schools and communities to best decide, how schools should work and what's the best way to do that. So, I think the first thing to share from all of us, we had a full staff meeting last night like this. So there was about, 60 of us on the call. We miss our children, our teens, our families. That is so sure. And, to be a part, I wish you could all watch us in a fishbowl and have these conversations, because that is always kind of where that starts, is that, all of us, like many of you, we just want things to be back to normal. I know for myself, I miss seeing families walk in and waving at them. And it's just a really different time. So just want to share the obvious. I also know that we are not on the Titanic, even though it feels like we're on the Titanic sometimes. But it's still such a huge responsibility that we've been given as schools. We have now all been kind of thrown into this practice of determining medical symptoms. And then after we determine the medical symptoms, then following pages of protocols, and then finding a way to communicate that clearly to staff and to families. And so that's a very new thing. And I know that there's a core group of us that are spending a whole lot of time on that, and then trying to help us to share it in ways that are the most effective for families. So I'm going to do my best today, and Melissa may jump in because she's been a part of a lot of these dialogues as well. At the same time, we're doing just our general role of supporting children, teens, and families in an educational partnership. I have to say that sometimes I don't get to that, but a very small amount of my day right now, because we are also supporting so many of these, the symptoms, the quarantining, all of those pieces. So the other thing that is very sure is that our staff is incredible. And I am so grateful for each and every one of them. They are consistently coming to the conversations with ideas and suggestions and processes. And I had a staff member today say, I think I can make a flow chart about this, and I'm like, run with it, So it's just really incredible. And I know that I've received accolades from many of you on the call about how much you've seen a difference and a level of abilities and confidence and instruction and content from everyone in this building. So thank you for that. And I know when I've shared those on to my coworkers, they've been like, wow, that makes me feel so good. It really helps. So if you haven't done that lately, it would be great. It really helps. And to let them know what are the things that we're doing that's really being helpful right now and working out really well. A review of the August 27th COVID screening for parents is where I kind of want to start. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So this was one of the documents that was released this past week from the ISDH, the Department of Health. Okay, Melissa, can you see that? Melissa, can you see that? Is that on there? Okay. So this is a little bit more narrow than the screening document that we gave you at the start of the year. So they just updated this. They didn't go into great detail about the update, except that they feel like these are the most important symptoms. And the overall goal of the protocols that are being created is to help schools to decrease the transmission of COVID-19. And so, so these are the 6 criteria that they've asked us to focus on. And so the fever part, the number 1 piece, the 100.4, has moved, as you know from us, that we've created 100 degrees as the school's temperature, and some schools have done 99.7 or whatever. But for our school, that's the direction that we've done. A sore throat. Wow. I mean, all of you are probably thinking like, gosh, sore throat, my child gets a sore throat, a lot this time of the year. So we'll talk through all that in a minute. A cough or shortness of breath, especially a new onset of cough or an uncontrolled cough, like a spasmic cough. Diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain. That's one of the components. Headache, particularly a new onset of a severe headache. And with a fever, especially with a fever, not and with a fever. And so for some of you, you know that for us or your children, they get headaches this time of the year, but this is kind of like, this does not seem like the typical, or this came on at 2 o'clock in the morning, or whatever that is. So, and a new loss of taste or smell. So, as you're thinking about these things, this is when you should not send your child to school. And in addition to that, we're asking that you please communicate to the teachers that this is what's happening, and help us to be a partner with this. So, in order, our goal is to keep doing school the best we can all year long. Our goal is to keep our school open all year long and keep adding children to the school when we can. And so in order for us to do that, we all have to play by these rules. And that means if your child, has a fever, even if it's not quite 100 degrees, talk with us. Let us coach you. I know that can be overwhelming for some of you because, you've got a job to do, and you may not feel like you don't want to tell us if they've got a cough or if they've got a headache or that they had one or that they had a fever this weekend. But, each time one of us does that, that could prevent the whole studio or the whole school from being open. And so I can't impress enough the importance of these screening components to, number 1, not send the child to school, and number 2, to communicate with us so you know the second piece of this. Because, it is also important that we make the next step of this really clear. So I'm going to just show this for a minute, and I'm not going to get too caught up in it, so please don't try to read it and understand it completely. But what I want you to know is that there's 2 parts of this second. So this is, the first half of this is an individual is not known to be a close contact. So if you've been watching, the spreadsheet we put on the website, we've had 1 young person that was detected the COVID-19 virus, and so they were positive, and everyone else in their family was negative, to much of their surprise, because they're very close. And so we wonder, if this could be a false positive, but it is what it is. So we went through all the steps of that, and so we had staff members that were quarantined, and as well as children that were quarantined, anyone that we felt was in that close contact. Now let's talk about close contact for just a second. I'm going to go back up to this sheet. So close contact is within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. So that means everyone in the household is a close contact. So that means if your child is positive, that everyone in the household is considered a close contact. So we're talking about 2 things right now. We're talking about symptoms, and we're talking about positive. And so I was talking about symptoms. I just moved into positive a minute, because that's when close contact comes into place. Close contact does not come into place when we talk about symptoms. So let that settle a second. So I'm going to go back to talking about not being a close contact and just having symptoms, okay? So this green part is not a close contact, okay? So they're symptomatic, And so this is why you're having this conversation. They're symptomatic and they've not been tested. They're symptomatic and they were tested. And then here's kind of some things to do. Now, if you read over this whole thing, what you will learn, which is what I learned, is that somebody that was symptomatic, was tested and positive, could come back to school before somebody that was a close contact, tested negative, and has no symptoms. Sit with that a second. But that's what could happen. So what I'm sharing with you is that we will more than likely have everyone quarantined for 14 days if they have symptoms and or if they are positive. And so that number is the same. So when you start looking at this page, you'll see that it really depends. There's some says 10 and 14. Our school is probably going to almost always tell you the time frame is 14. Now, that doesn't mean if a child has a cough that they have to stay home for 14 days. Let's talk about what happens if they just have symptoms, this top part, and they're not a close contact, okay? So if we're talking just about symptoms, okay? So let's go back up here to the symptoms again. So your child has this awful cough that started overnight. They don't normally have a cough. You notify the teachers. The teachers will confer with the cupola staff.
Barbara.
And we'll
Barbara, we lost your screen. Can you reshare?
Oh, sure. Okay, coming. Okay, you see it now? Is it back?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So your child has a this cough, and they talk to the teachers. They confer with the cupola staff. We've determined that this does not, there's no other reason for this that we can tell, and we don't know for sure. So now 3 things need to happen. Either that child has to stay home for 2 weeks, or they get tested, and we'll talk about test in a minute, or they go to the doctor and the doctor writes a note that says this child is not sick due to COVID. It has to say those words. It has to say if this is not COVID related. It could say an ear infection, but it also needs to say it's not COVID related. Now, I have not seen this note come from anybody yet. I think, what I've learned from pediatricians in the area is that most will not say it's not COVID related because they don't know either. They can't tell if someone is COVID or not. As you can tell, these COVID symptoms could look like so many things. And so we go back to the second option, which is going to get tested. And so they're tested, and there are lots of ways to get tested. Many pediatrician offices are now testing. Urgent care centers in the area are testing. The Optum site up in Clarksville is testing. Some you have to register it online. Some you make an appointment with your doctor, etc. The time frames are all different, and they vary by week. We're doing a lot of testing right now in Floyd County, so the times to come back are a little bit higher. And so, you get tested and it's negative. So then the next thing, so you say it's negative. The next thing that needs to happen is the child, are they fever-free for 24 hours, and are their symptoms improving? So they might still have that cough, but they're not hacking their head off anymore or whatever. That we're showing the symptoms are improving or they went away. And so as soon as that negative test comes back, they can come back to school as long as they are fever-free for 24 hours and their symptoms are improving. So the test is positive. And so that starts a whole contact tracing on our end here. And so that's why we need to know immediately what the symptoms are so we know how to contact trace. Because technically the best practice is that a child, once they leave with symptoms, we can go back as far as 48 hours for contact tracing. And I know you know how busy these teachers are, and that a lot of things happen in a day, and going back 48 hours really needs to happen the day that you find out. And so as soon as you get that positive test, the first thing that you do, or maybe the second, is to communicate to the school. Email directly to me, bfounder@shinyminds.com. Like, this is one of my roles right now. This may change. It may go to other people later, but for now, send that. You can send it directly to the teachers. They will send it to me. Either way you go is fine. but please notify us within 2 hours of you getting those results. You can call the school. Those messages come right to the voicemail. If you're going to call, leave a message for me. I'm at extension 1101. So, negative, they can come back if they're fever-free for 24 hours, or if they and if their symptoms have improved. If they're positive, they have to stay out for that 14-day period, and they have to be fever-free for 24 hours, and their symptoms improved. Okay, so I'm going to take a pause there and let people ask questions. So we're going to get to all the rest of this conversation, but I'm going to take just a 5-minute pause. I'm not going to pause for 5 minutes. We're hopefully going to take questions for 5 minutes just about these subjects, okay? So just about what we've talked about, and while people are putting their questions down, I'm going to show you, this is the COVID-19 new form from the State Department, Indiana State Department of Health, when to quarantine. So you'll be receiving these documents, but it just kind of, again, kind of talks about, kind of walks families through. It has this nice little quarantine scenario. So if you started the quarantine here, and then here you had additional contact of someone that's positive, that starts the quarantine over again. So, and it gives you a nice little form here where you can keep track of your child's symptoms at home or other members of the household. So we'll be sharing that with you also. Okay, I'm going to pause and see what questions we have.
Okay, Barbara. So just so you know, we're at least one person is anxious to know if we're on target for the September 8th start. And then the only other question right now is, are we really putting all the positive cases in the spreadsheet? They guess they're asking if there's really only been one case so far.
That is it. That's what we've said. And, we're not even sure, just to be frank, that is a positive, but we're treating it as a positive. But we've only had one. Yep. Okay.
One person's asking for dates to be included on that, especially as time moves forward on the tracking sheet. I guess they're asking to add the date of when that happened. Thank you to the answer for the spreadsheet. Will these new requirements for what happens when learners are sent home with symptoms or failed screening be communicated in writing in addition to the documents from the state? Did that make sense?
In a perfect world, yes. So if you've been sent home from symptoms, our goal is to at least have a conversation with you to make sure you know, and our goal is to eventually be able to follow that up with an email. I wrote down some notes about that. So in the past few days, we have sent home, 4 staff members for potential symptoms. Or someone in their household has potential symptoms, and 9 learners. So that is just in the past couple of days. And so, so we're doing lots of things. We have to do contact tracing for all those kids. We have to find out who was in 6 feet for 15 minutes. And so all of that just takes extra time. So sometimes the email will or will not come, depending on all those other pieces. So we'll at least, let you know what the parameters are. And that's obviously why we're having this conversation right now. So you'll know those pieces yourself. Any other questions, Melissa?
No other questions. There's one more handling on the side. We're going to forward an email with information the parent's looking for. Here's one. If you send them home for symptoms, are you requiring testing?
So we can't require or we can't mandate. You can just have them stay home for 14 days if you don't want to test. And they just need to be no fever for 24 hours and symptoms have improved.
So if they have one symptom, this is a different person asking. If they have one symptom, they stay home, then the fastest way to resolve it is to get a negative COVID test.
Yeah, and remember, so we do this conversation with you, usually it starts with the studio teachers. That's why I say communicate with them, and we'll ask you questions like, is this a typical thing for them? If you're like, well, it is pretty typical, but they've also had a 99.7 fever, it's not really a fever by you, like, talk to us, I know none of you want your child to be the one that puts everyone else out of school for 2 weeks. And that's what we're trying to prevent, and so let's talk about this 6 feet for 15 minutes. And so if you have children, like in some traditional schools, children sit at their desk, they do not move, they're all facing forward, and they're 6 to 8 feet apart. And a lot of times, like in Noe County, they've got them in different pods, and so just the pods would have to, within a class, so they've got a red and green pod, for instance, and so if someone in the red pod is positive, then all the red pod goes home for 2 weeks. And so for now, for us, it's by studio. And so that's like our pods. And so they don't interact with anybody else in the building unless they're in extended learning, another conversation. But 6 feet for 15 minutes, that could be a large portion of those kids if we want them to do the things that we do at our school. So the teachers have made great precautions at lunch and otherwise to try to reduce that. But on a given situation and a given child, more kids might be quarantined than not. And so I know that none of us want our child to be the one that puts everyone else in quarantine. So that's why we just really have to communicate if we're seeing any of those symptoms. Any other questions, Melissa?
People are anxious to do the discussion about when the start date is.
Yeah. Okay.
I know. We've kind of put in there that you're providing context for what's coming for that information.
Yeah. Right. We gotta start from the beginning.
Yes.
There is one question asking if you're going to put the names on the spreadsheet.
On the positive tracking, absolutely not. We will not be sharing any children's or adult names on the spreadsheet. That would be a huge violation. Okay, so we've got all that down. We think we understand that. So let's look at what's happening in our county right now. So percentage of positivity is still from the national statistics high in Floyd County. We're right about 9%. It's fluctuated in the last month. Am I still sharing my screen? No, let me do that again. So.
Prainer Hannigan, if you can give her feedback on that, mine is just suffering over here, so I can't tell if it is or isn't. That's why I'm not answering, Barbara.
I'm not seeing the screen yet.
Yeah. Okay, it should be coming. Okay, you see that now?
Not quite yet, but it's thinking. Here it comes.
Okay. So
I can see it.
Okay, so some of you might go to this. This is the dashboard in Indiana. So this is where we get these percentages. So the unique individuals is at 9.1% over the last 7 days in Floyd County, and that's fluctuated between 11+% to 8.5% over the past 3 weeks. And so right now we're at 9.1 with unique individuals. Now what that means is all test is usually a smaller number, and they just started putting that up there. That means, like, for some people, they go and get tested once a month without symptoms. They just want to know. And so it takes those people out, and we take those people out are the people that are actually getting tested that are thinking they might be positive or have symptoms is at 9.1%. So I'm going to stop sharing that just a second so that I can just kind of tell you next steps. And so that's important for us to know. And then, so our next conversation is how do we decide about the hybrid start? And so I've been meeting in groups with all of the levels of the studios. I also met with our reopening committee, which is about 29 staff members. And then last night we had our full staff meeting. And suddenly, people are like, we want the hybrid kids to come, like, how do we do this safely? And so here's where we landed. Where we landed right now is that under some very specific conditions in the early education program, we're just going to start there. So this is for families in early ed. I think there are 21 children that are a part of the hybrid. And so we're going to let those children start on Tuesday in the full hybrid mode, just early ed studios. We'll talk about the rest in just a minute. Under these conditions, so you need to know that these things are part of the start. Number one, we're piloting a start. We're going to see how it goes. I sent another staff member home today with potential symptoms. And so we only have so many ways that we can support the studios if a teacher or teachers has to go home. And so I will not do school on campus unless we can do it well. And so, you know, what we know right now is that when everyone's well, we can do school well. When people aren't well, speaking specifically of staff, we cannot do things well. We may be using some subs this year for some specific work, but they won't be necessarily going in studios to do regular subbing. It's too much. We have learned too much. There's no way to give that to someone that hasn't been doing what we're doing. And so again, we're only going to do on campus when we can do it well. And here's how we can do it well. We can do it well, number one, if families make sure they do all the things we just talked about. And so if there are symptoms, they share. Because if they don't and kids come, or they think, well, I'm just going to test it, but I don't want to tell anybody because I don't want them, that could shut the whole early ed down, all down, closed for a period of time, because we will have staff members also in quarantine. If we have a staff member that's been within 6 feet for 15 minutes of a child that's positive, they cannot come back to campus for at least 2 weeks, 14 days. And so if that happens with a couple of those early ed teachers, we don't have enough to cover all the studios. And so it is super important that that piece happens first. The second piece that has to happen is that we know that if there becomes a kiddo with symptoms, they do have to follow this protocol. And so we all have to be consistent with that. We have to communicate well and make sure we support that. If your child's been identified as a close contact, that could be 3 or 4 kids in the studio. That could be the whole studio. It will just depend. It will depend on what's happened, how that those teachers feel about who was in contact, if they were for that 15 minutes. We also have to go back again 2 days, so 48 hours prior to the positive case. So we need to understand that part too. And so, you know, you need to realize that when we're doing this hybrid, we're hopeful that if everyone follows these protocols and fall is nice to us, to our immune systems, that we'll be able to continue to do early ed hybrid. We are not going to start the Wednesdays right away. Wednesdays will come later. But for now, early ed will start the hybrid mode on Tuesday under those conditions, and knowing that it could close or be postponed or go back to FSP or be in quarantine at any minute. Okay, I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions about early ed.
There was really more of a comment about the positivity rate being a key factor in the decision making, and that the CDC recommended people not get tested who are asymptomatic, and that influencing. I just put in the chat that there are a lot of factors that can go into that number, as you mentioned, and also that just one factor of the decision. If you want to add to that, just wanted to have you the opportunity to respond.
I agree with all that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then Hannigan and I just kind of highlighted the key points of what you said. One person asked, how long will we be doing the pilot program? But then you kind of answered that question right after they typed it. So basically, I summarized it up as that it can change at any time, that we could go back to FSP, that we could have to go to online learning only, we could add, it just depends on what's happening. Yep. Any other questions from the people in the chat? I don't see any right now.
Okay. So let's talk about 6+-year-olds. So at this point, the school does not feel like it's the right thing to move all hybrid kids on campus. That would be over 330 kids on campus. So we're just going to start early ed that way, and we're going to add some additional hybrid kids to the rest of the building. Let me talk about how that's going to happen. So after a lot of discussion and a lot of suggestions and a lot of great ideas from a lot of the key members of the staff that were part of all these discussions, here's where we landed. So right now, some studios have 0% of their class on campus, and some have 30% of their class on campus. And so we're looking at a criteria of somewhere about around 35% of the kids on campus. Hybrid on campus is right at about 50%. And so, 30%, 35% is in this middle ground. And so that's where we think is the right place to start. And so the way that you can be considered for that position, and considers is the underlined word. I know from talking to many of you that you're like, if things aren't going great, we don't want our kids there. We are fine. We're not planning on doing anything different. We'll keep doing what we're doing. But there's some of you that, did not sign up for FSP because you felt like you were okay, but gosh, it would really be helpful because you're working from home. Then your kiddo did go on campus for 2 days, or you could wait, or I really need this now for them to be on campus for a day or 2 days, or depending on the age level. And so you can email your studio teachers. They're not going to take it first come, first serve, so don't worry about that. They're going to take those emails over today and tomorrow morning probably, and they're going to look at them, and they're going to think about their enrollment and what percentage they're in, and their enrollment in total, and then they're going to offer those spots to those families. And so each studio might do that a little bit differently. For sure they're going to take into account siblings. And so you may be the first person that emailed, but there is also a family that has 3 siblings, and we know that this family is in need, and they weren't, it was terrific that we were able to get all of the families in that needed FSP. I really believe that it's possible that we'll get in all the next layer of need, so if there's a need and those families want to communicate that need, then I'm hopeful that those numbers will work out the way they've done in the past. And so, you'll email those studios and say, right now they're identified in peace, and, we'd like them to start, as soon as they can. And then those teachers, and you're going to give them some space and some grace because, they're trying to get a lot of work done in the next couple of days, and then they have a long weekend. They may not get back to you until next week. And so I'm giving them the liberty to make that decision so that they can make the best decisions for their studio. And I think all of you want that too. And so some of them might email you back this week. Some of you, it might be the middle of next week. I'd say it'd be sometime in that time frame that they'll respond to you and say, yes, we have a spot for you and you can start on Tuesday or whatever. And so if you're identified for hybrid peace and they say, yes, you can come, then you would just come for peace. Okay, so that would be Monday, Tuesday, I think. And if you were just, if they said harmony, so their goal is also to find the blend, right? So a peace and a harmony. So there might be 5 peace people that sign up, but they only have spots for 2 peace and 2 harmony. So, all that gets super complicated, and all of them felt like this was the best way to help another layer of families in need without getting to a situation where we do this too quickly, and then either a whole level, a whole studio, or a whole school has to go back to off campus for a while. So our goal is to be open in the long term, and we know that in order to do that, we have to make really sharp, informed decisions along the way. So, okay, ready for questions.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of action over here. Some people are a little confused. So just to reiterate, the process is that not everyone 6 and up hybrid is starting. There will be some people who may be able to start based on a studio level decision. If you feel like that this is a strong need for you, you should email the teachers directly, and the teachers are going to be determining whether they can add any learners to the studio. If you feel like you can stay off campus, it would be much appreciated if you can keep your learner off campus right now, even if at some point you want to add them to the hybrid. Which this may have answered that question, Barbara, but somebody kind of wondered, like, would they lose their hybrid spot if they keep them off campus now?
Absolutely not.
Right.
So we're technically, for the 6-year-olds and up, so the 6 to 9 program and up, not starting hybrid yet. We're just starting another layer of families in need. And so those are from the hybrid enrollments. And we will relook at this again the week before October break, so 4 weeks from now, and determine then if we will start full hybrid right after October break, or what the next step's going to be. So we'll relook at this again. We'll have another one of these video calls that week before October break to give you updates and to share what's the next step now. So
I think we answered most of the questions that were kind of confusion questions. People, if you need to add, please do. I'm going to go to the next one that's not related to that topic. How will teachers be able to continue to support both more on-campus learners and online learners during the day at the same time? I do see that Hannigan popped in and said teaching staff has been training all summer to prepare for this moment. So if you want to add more to that, or Hannigan.
Well,
Yeah,
we've all become skilled jugglers over the summer. We've been in extensive juggling training, and each studio is going to support that a little bit differently. But do know that all co-teachers and co-advisors are in conversation on how best to meet all of those needs. And so be confident, and you'll be experiencing all of the various approaches sooner than later. But we have been in training for how to juggle both of these worlds in a collaborative, dynamic manner. And we're looking forward to getting to move on to this next level and getting to see some of the learners in person.
Yeah. And it looks like it was clarified in the chat, but just to reiterate for everyone who's not reading in the chat, you can absolutely do off-campus learning at any time. You can decide to do that. Like you can wake up one morning and do off-campus learning, especially if you feel like there's symptoms or they need to be on quarantine, but they're not sick. We expect people to flow back and forth between. It's just a matter of communicating with your teachers, and they all should have really expressed how they prefer that to happen. I think most are doing emails still. Well, I shouldn't say that. In teens, it might be different, but just follow what your teachers say. It never hurts to check in. And there is somebody who wants to clarify, when is the next decision point? They think they heard that this 35% or so level will be in place until October break. Is that correct?
so that's the plan right now. If that changes, of course, we'll let you know. But the plan right now is to keep this next level of need supported, and then we'll have another call like this around October 5th before we go on fall break.
Barbara, there was also a question a little while up in the chat that was just clarifying: should everyone be communicating with their advisors or studio teachers about their need for hybrid learning, or should you only communicate if you really need to be in person? Meaning, I think it was phrased, do we need to let them know if we're okay with keeping our hybrid learner home, or do we just not show up? Lol, which I appreciated. So should they let them know either way?
So hybrid, except for early ed, and the only time the early ed, someone needs to communicate if their child is not going to show up is for early ed. So we're assuming all the hybrid kids will show up starting next Tuesday in early ed, unless you've shared or filled out the form that we've been sharing that you want to change enrollment. As far as the other age levels, you can imagine, as Hannigan just said, how they're juggling things. Although they love you, they only need to hear from you if you have a need. And we're adding this other layer of need, and so you only have to communicate with them if you're like, we need that other layer of need, and my child's in gemstones and turquoise. Otherwise, there's no reason to communicate. You just know that when hybrid's ready to start in the 6+ programs, we will let you know that. Right now, hybrid is on hold for elementary and teens. It is on hold. It's only going to start as another layer of need for those families, and hopefully we'll be able to support those families that need that extra layer until we're ready to start hybrid.
Kind of still, I guess people just still aren't super clear. If we decide to keep our learners at home, even if you open up the hybrid program 100%, is that okay?
Absolutely. So we do ask, like for some of you, you want to keep your hybrid spot, so you're just communicating with your teachers, that's fine. If you've decided, we're probably going to move to off-campus instruction for the rest of the year or the rest of the, for we don't know how long, then you can fill out that form that we've been linking in the cupola notes to be able to communicate a change of enrollment. Otherwise, just communicate with the teachers. My kids in hybrid, early ed, for example, I know they can start on Tuesday, but we're going to hold them because we don't like what's happening or for whatever reason. And so we're going to wait until we think things are more stable in the community or whatever. And then, you know, you can keep communicating with them about that. And they'll just keep you knowing that you are working from off campus for now.
Yeah. And Joel, I think that just answered your question. So if you want to hold your spot, you just say, we're staying home for now. We may come back on hybrid at some point. But if you are saying you do want to convert to that full-time off-campus learning, please go ahead and use the form. That just helps us have a better idea of, you know, eventually who may come back. But all of this, we're just reiterating, all of this is to say you will not lose any spots. You can at any time or even any day, if you are in hybrid learning, there's one day that week that it just doesn't feel right to come for whatever reason, you can always just go to off-campus learning and then come back to hybrid when you're ready. Any other questions from people in the chat? I don't see anything getting added. Hannigan, did I miss anything?
Yep, we just got a question. This is in reference to some of the verbiage from the recent cupola notes. Again, talking about if you're wanting to change the status for the enrollment for your kiddo. The cupola notes refer to if you need your enrolled child or teen to return to campus, either for the hybrid or the FSP. The cupola notes say, we'll notify you after we've processed your request if you're on the wait list or your timeline for re-entry. And so there is a question just kind of wanting to clarify, what does the wait list mean and the timeline?
Yeah, so if a family is asking for FSP that was currently on hybrid and there's not a spot in FSP in Tundra Studio, then they're on the wait list, and we have no idea how long that timeline would be. It would mean that somebody else in the FSP or hybrid would re-enroll as a full-time off-campus in order for that spot to open up. So, but yes, if you want to do a permanent change of enrollment, use the form. If you're just in FSP, or even if your level is starting in hybrid, early ed only right now, then you can just communicate with your teachers.
And I think maybe I'm just going to throw in maybe another clearer way to think about it is the hybrid program for 6 and up essentially is not even starting right now, right?
Okay.
It's really, we would prefer to be just hybrid continues to be thought of as off-campus learning. That's the frame of mind to have. And then if you want to come anyway, because it's a strong need for you, please communicate with your teachers, and they're going to do their best to get as many kids who need it in. But it just depends, because we're really trying to keep those numbers very low until we get a better handle on the just where the symptoms are right now.
Yeah, and community spread. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for coming. If something comes up, you know, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I hope this was helpful, and we really appreciate you bringing your questions and comments, because that helps us to know how we're doing with communicating. So have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Wave the hand again. Bye. You can wave.